Hello, everybody. My name is Jim, and this is a review of The Puzzle Master by Danielle Trussoni. This review is going to have spoilers in it. I already know because I mentioned this in the wrap up that featured this book. So if you want a short, spoiler free review of this, check out the wrap up for June. So this is going to feature some spoilers. I need to be able to show my receipts. I'm going to break this down a little bit. I am going to talk about some things that I actually liked about this book, and then the parts that just bogged down the story. The first thing I want to talk about is Conundrum, the dog, Connie. I was more concerned about this good girl than I was about any of the other characters in the whole book. So we are introduced to Connie. I'm pretty sure in chapter 1. I'm holding the book in my hands right now so I can flip through some of the tabs. I have many tabs. The way that Danielle Trussoni wrote Mike Brink, who was the main character, and his dog in that first chapter, it just kind of set him up to be this good guy, like, oh, he's cracking the window for Connie and he's leaving water for the dog. But nowhere in that chapter is there an explanation why the dog is there in the first place. I don't trust leaving an animal in the car for an extended period of time, and the fact that he is going to meet people in a prison, it's not going to be just like a 5-minute trip. You know, he's not just going in to pick something up and then immediately go back to his truck and go home. And even if that window is cracked, it's still going to be hot because, you know, you're leaving it cracked enough so that the animal doesn't escape. And it made me concerned for the dog. Like, I wanted him to wrap things up so that he could go back out to his hot car. You don't learn until later that Connie is an emotional support dog, because after Mike Brink's accident, he went through a depressive spell. There was a lot of things that were going on with him mentally. He didn't really understand what was happening, but he obtained Connie. Or maybe he had Connie already and she went through training to become an emotional support dog. But that wasn't revealed until later on in the book. And I feel like, and I even texted somebody that, you know, I really hope that they come out and say that Connie is an emotional support dog, because I cannot justify him bringing her along and leaving her in a hot truck. Even if he gives her water, even if he cracks the window, just leaving her out there in the elements, it just makes me feel bad. So all of this set up to make him look like a good guy, and I'm concerned about the dog that he leaves behind. That's the start. That's where we begin the whole thing. And I don't know, I didn't do any research on this. I don't know if, you know, emotional support dogs are allowed inside prisons. But Connie, throughout the book, she's very well behaved. I don't think that she would be any trouble if she were to enter the prison and maybe stay in an air-conditioned office with her water or something like that. So I don't know. Like I said, I was more concerned about this dog. She was dog-napped as well later on, and I don't know why. I don't understand the reasoning why Connie was taken from the truck. It never really made sense, and we're going to get to that in a bit. But yeah, I was very concerned about the dog. The dog was my favorite character, I think, in this whole book. She was the only one that I was fully invested in, and once Brink took her home and left her there, I was exponentially more bored. Now, I need to talk about Mike Brink's gift. It is described as a gift throughout the entire book, and let me open to a page that actually explains what it is that okay, so he has something called acquired savant syndrome. Super rare, but it's a condition where he is suddenly able to solve puzzles with ease and see patterns, especially with numbers, that is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary gift. It is treated as a gift, and I would say, you know, after understanding what it is that he has, that it is certainly something where, while he didn't expect this to happen to him, of course, it is certainly something that he could turn into a positive and take advantage of. The only thing is that whenever this is brought up, it is typically brought up in a very boastful way, not necessarily by Mike Brink himself, but by the author, because we are reminded over and over he could solve this in seconds. He could read this in a couple of minutes. He wouldn't need to take any time. And it's something that we don't need to have drilled into our heads every single time a number sequence or a journal entry is brought up. I think sometimes it's used to explain away a situation where, for example, in the story, Cam Putney, who's like this big brute who's intimidating and not Mike Brink's friend, he brings Brink back to his apartment, and Brink is crafty and quick and locks Cam out. And this gives Brink time to read through a journal. And we're told before he reads the journal, oh, he'll be finished with this tops. The regular person would finish this in, X amount of time. And I'm sitting here reading through the journal like, damn. Like, I feel inadequate now. There were some vulnerable moments, however, that I wish this book had more of. There was a time in the book where Mike Brink talked about how he struggled with depression and how he was close to offing himself as a result of not knowing what this was that was really going on with him. It was very overwhelming. It's that sort of thing that brought him down to earth, and it made me feel for him as a character. He was, explaining a little bit more about himself, but he left those parts out, I guess because he didn't want to feel vulnerable with the people that he was communicating with. But the author drilled into our heads many, many times just how smart Mike Brink is and how quickly he can solve puzzles and how number sequences play in his mind all the time. This was on repeat constantly, every chapter. So most of Brink's motivation, when he went to the prison, he spoke to a prisoner named Jess Price, who was wrongfully incarcerated for a murder of either her fiance, boyfriend, husband, her lover, and she needed someone's help to basically set the story straight. She admired Brink. He was invited by Jess Price's doctor, Dr. Thessaly Moses, to the prison. Basically, Mike Brink and Jess Price had a little mind chat at one of the tables in the prison, because she would not speak, because she was worried that the cameras were going to pick her up and they were going to use whatever she said against her, or it was going to put the people who she spoke to in danger. So she didn't say much, but she did hand Brink some puzzles in the beginning, which this was the first time where I had to suspend my disbelief, because she used the blood of her fingernails, or on her fingers, to mark certain letters, and she crumpled it up. And when he opened it, the marks were there perfectly, as they should be. I'm like, if that's blood, that's going to smear. You can't just crumple up a bloody paper and then expect all the dots to be where they are supposed to be, first of all. Second of all, there was a doctor before Dr. Thessaly Moses named Dr. Wraith. And I was actually FaceTiming with somebody when this happened, and so I was kind of explaining to him, like, Dr. Wraith spells his name Raythe. Mike Brink does have this gift for puzzles and solving puzzles, but unless I saw the name Wraith, I would think that it was Wraith. So he was able to figure this anagram, I think. He got it, immediately, but I feel like it would still be difficult to figure out a puzzle like that with someone's last name if that last name isn't common or it's not a common spelling. I had to suspend my disbelief there as well, that he was able to figure that out so fast and there was no struggle. I wish that there was a little bit of a struggle and there weren't so many just like ahas with the puzzle solving. I wanted him to have a bit of a hard time, and I know that there was one big puzzle, like the central puzzle, that he had a bit more of a difficult time with, but it just seemed easy. I get that he's the puzzle master, but I don't like when things are easy in books. I don't like when the hero is able to figure things out so fast and, say and do all the right things, and the author brags about them all the time. Speaking of cop outs, with things being a little bit too easy, there was further motivation and further clues provided through dreams and journal entries. The dreams were a bit odd. When we were first introduced to these dreams, it was in the form of Jess Price visiting Mike Brink. They had sex in the dreams. It was definitely an insta-love situation where Mike Brink was like, I have to solve this for her because I love her after seeing her for 15 minutes. Again, this is the second thriller that this has happened in that I've read in the past couple of months, and I want to pull my hair out. But two, the whole dream thing, I was like, oh my god, this is just behind her eyes again. This is another astral projection storyline. It was just weird and convenient for Jess Price to enter Mike Brink's dreams and give him that, attaboy, that extra push, this woman that he immediately fell in love with. However, I will say, the first entry in Jess Price's journal was great. It was a ghost story. It set the ghost story up with the dolls, which creepy dolls are definitely my vibe. I love that. If there are any horror or thriller books that are specifically about those creepy porcelain dolls, or even like baby dolls, I don't care, dolls, they are creepy, and I want to read actual horror stories about them. If Danielle Trussoni would have written a book of nothing but journal entries from Jess Price's journal about the haunted house, the Sedge House, the creepy dolls, Violaine, who is the main creepy doll, who is designed after the doll maker's daughter's likeness, and she passed away, and the doll is there's something going on with the doll, right? There's some supernatural stuff going on with Violaine. If she would have focused on this and kind of had this story end with Jess Price's lover dying and Jess being arrested, I would have loved that. I would have loved this from Jess's perspective before she was put away. I don't know about you guys. I don't know if you prefer happy endings, but I think that the way these journal entries were set up, I think it would have been an amazing book to have that happen, and then you have Jess solve the mystery of the house by figuring out that there's something supernatural going on in it, but then she ends up being seen as crazy anyway and is taken away to prison for the death of her lover, which she did not commit. Like, I know that sounds a little bit frustrating, but I think I would have loved that. So the ghost story itself was very enjoyable, and I think that is one of the reasons why I did not give this a 1-star review, because that journal entry alone, I wish she would have expanded that. It wasn't boring. I was completely engrossed in what I was reading. And while that journal entry in particular could be considered exposition, it didn't slow down the plot. However, there were many instances of exposition slowing down the plot. This story is slow. There were times where I felt that it would pick up, or that it was picking up, and then all of a sudden you have a wall of dialogue where somebody is explaining something, or you have a full chapter that's going through exposition, expositing information, and it caused the story to have this stop and go effect. The problem was that the fast-paced stuff would be like one chapter, maybe, but then the slow portions would be 5 or 6. You would have so much dialogue of people explaining. You have people traveling from place to place. You would have the dream sequences that really didn't matter too much. You would have information that was introduced at weird times when it probably should have been introduced earlier. For example, like with the dog. And then you would have situations where you would get information and then it would be repeated again. Kind of similar to the whole gift thing where the author constantly bragged about the gift and how he was able to see numbers. But it also happened with a couple of examples. There was the time where Mike Brink, I think in a full chapter, it was like a flashback. It went through his time in high school when he played football. He had his accident and his mind started to change. He didn't know how to handle it. And first of all, one of the things that I marked was that he solved the low shoe square, which by the explanation in the book is a grid of 9 numbers whose columns added up to 15 on every side. This magic square had been first constructed in China around 2300 BC. He, Brink, knew nothing of the square's history when he drew it for his mom at 3 in the morning one cold February night in 2008. She had studied the square with care and, recognizing that he'd made something extraordinary, said, "You've been given a gift. You can ignore it or you can use it, but you can't hide from it." And it was her who kind of helped him see his gift in another way. But if I were his mom, realistically, like, unless she knew what the low shoe square was, I would have been like, I don't know what this is. Realistically, I know that this is a story and it's supposed to push things along, but that was something that I had to mark, because if I was his mom, and I know that it was supposed to be a big deal and like it was supposed to be a meaningful part of the book, because it was, but realistically, if I were his mom, I would not know what I was looking at. But then in the following chapter, he shows Jess Price. Yes, he shows Jess Price the low shoe square, and he kind of re-explains his situation, how his accident happened, how his mind works the way that it does. And there was another part that did sort of the same thing. It wasn't exposition, but it was after the chapter where Mike Brink had his first dream. Jess Price was featured in it, and they communicated, and it was, it was, like I said before, it was that initial push to continue forward. I believe in the next chapter over, there was a scene where Jess Price was laying in bed and she was mouthing, or she was speaking the words, she was sleep talking the words that Mike Brink heard in his dream. Then later on, it's explained that she is able to visit him in his dreams. Like, she is able to talk to him and they are able to communicate, and she's like, remember what I said in the dream. And I'm like, dadgummit, it would have been so much more impactful had I learned, for me personally, had I learned at that point that she was having the same dreams and she was able to communicate him through the dream. Knowing in advance that she was able to, in a scene that was so inconsequential, it was so dull, it was through the perspective of someone else. It was through the perspective of Cam. I think I mentioned him before as the big brute. He was a security officer. Learning it through his perspective was so much less impactful than having that surprise with Mike Brink when he's sitting there in front of Jess Price and her saying, "Remember what I said, remember what I told you." That initial confusion, and then being like, oh my gosh, she knows. I wanted to know it at that point. I wanted to be surprised too. And let me think if there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about. Oh, right. Things that these characters did that were against their personalities in the first place. Oh my gosh. I almost forgot about this. There were so many examples of this, and I need to go through some of them. So again, there are going to be spoilers, and I'm sorry if this review is kind of all over the place. It's just one that I felt like I had to do, but it's not really one that's organized very well, clearly. But let's talk about Jess Price. So this whole time, she is worried about speaking in public because she's worried about the cameras. She's worried that, the place might be mic'd and it would pick up the things that she said and it would be used against her. Or it could put Mike Brink or Thessaly Moses in danger, which, they're in danger now anyway. But she was worried. She was worried about saying too much and, bad things happening to the people around her, because when she spoke to Dr. Wraith, he was murdered. this was her personality. She basically made a vow of silence in the prison, which is why she was so cryptic. She slid puzzles to Mike Brink. She met him in his dreams. She did all of these things to get around speaking. But there was a point in Dr. Thessaly Moses' office where, again, she would not speak. Thessaly had a recorder sitting on her desk, asking Jess that, it's just you and me. Just speak into this recording freely, speak your truth, say what's on your mind. Jess refused. So Thessaly ended up leaving the room, and this was a recording that was supposed to be sent to Mike Brink, and it was. This is, from his perspective, he's listening to it. And Jess spills her guts. She speaks in paragraphs upon paragraphs of her situation, her backstory. I can't remember exactly what she talked about in that moment, but I was sitting here like, she doesn't trust Thessaly to speak to her face to face, but the only way that her recording could get to Brink was through Thessaly. So Thessaly is going to take this recording anyway. How does she trust her right now? There were a lot of instances too where people were just trusting Thessaly Moses. I don't know what it is about her. Maybe she just had a soft face. Maybe she was very motherly. I'm not sure. But there was a time where Mike Brink revealed to her information, and while Thessaly was a good guy, it was a moment where you just realized that Dr. Wraith was murdered. Dr. Thessaly Moses was his replacement. And at that point, I was like, I don't know if Dr. Moses is innocent necessarily. So I don't know if I would give her that information right off the bat. Again, she did end up being, one of the good guys, but at that moment, with what I knew, I was like, this isn't very smart of you, Brink. Mr. Genius. It's not really smart of you to give all of this information away that you just got from Jess Price, who is afraid of anybody knowing anything because of the cameras and the microphones, possibly. This woman that you immediately fell in love with, had a connection to. I feel like you giving information to anybody would be dangerous. How do you know that Thessaly Moses is so safe, especially when part of your background was that you weren't able to pick up social cues as easily now? How are you so confident that this woman that you just met is worthy of that information and isn't part of the jig, So that was weird. And then when you do get to meet the antagonist, who I haven't really even talked about. I've talked about Cam, but I haven't really talked about Jameson, Sedge, and Anne-Marie, last name omitted. All of the characters in this book, except for Cam Putney, came across as trying too hard to be smart, and so they all sounded the same, and they all sounded very old-fashioned in the way that they spoke. But Jameson, Sedge, and Anne-Marie were acquaintances, well, at least Anne-Marie. I can't remember if Jameson Sedge was, but it happened in the Sedge house, the event that got Jess Price locked away. And Anne-Marie was familiar with her and the whole situation, and they wanted to solve the puzzle too. It's a thing. So anyway, Mike Brink, against his better judgment, visits them, and it becomes this whole thing. Connie gets dognapped, which sucked, and I don't even know why, because they needed Brink, so why are they trying to piss him off? I don't get it. Connie ends up being dognapped. Cam ends up attacking Thessaly Moses in her house. There is a car chase where Anne-Marie and Sedge kind of, I don't know, do what's that cop maneuver where they try to run you off the road? They do that. They succeed in that. They flip Brink's truck. They give him a gash on his head, which I was worried about in a dream afterward, that he had suddenly reverted back to how he was before his accident, because there was a comment where he saw the chess pieces on the board and he didn't really think of any patterns or anything like that. So they almost put him in the hospital. They totaled his car. They kidnapped his dog. They hurt his friend. They brought him back to the Sedge house. But they were like, oh, just trust us anyway, because we need your help, and we need to solve this puzzle too, or whatever. So just come with us. Just trust us. It's fine. I'm sorry for all that stuff that happened. It didn't make sense for the villains to be like that, and for him to actually trust them to do what they said they're going to do at that moment. So it's just another series of events that I thought was very shaky. Falling in love with the inmate right from the get-go. All of these dreams that are happening that are kind of pushing him along. The journal entries, the villains being trustworthy even though they've done nothing trustworthy. They've done everything to hurt Brink. Trusting in people before you even know that they're good. Not doing things that your personality would otherwise say that you would do. It just felt weird. It felt like everything was done for the sake of the plot. The puzzles, I guess, were fine. I was kind of lost in their explanations whenever they were brought up and explained. It was just something that I couldn't remember. If you asked me about any of them, I don't know. But it just needed some fine tuning. It needed a little less exposition. It needed to be faster. And it was weird because like I said, going through that list, it was like the story had a lot going on, but it was just but at the same time, it was so slow. I wish it was better. This cover is amazing. I would have loved for her to focus on the ghost story. I really would have. I would have loved for this to have been from the perspective of Jess Price. Scrap the Puzzle Master title, call it The Elaine or The House of Dolls or Sedge House or something. And let this be from Jess's perspective before she's locked away, and have all of the events unfold that she wrote about, because that was the best part about this book. I loved that part. And considering this is a 2-star book, the fact that I say that I loved that part. So, man, so much potential. But anyway, that's been my review for this book. I'm sorry if it was a lot of back and forth, but I kind of just did it by the seat of my pants. I didn't really have a plan for this, but I wanted to talk about this at some point, and I figured now would be a good time because I'm still working on other videos that need a little bit more editing. So if you want to read this book, even after all of that, after being spoiled and knowing what happened, the link to the Goodreads page is in the description below. Click on that if you read the blurb and some spoiler-free reviews, I guess, and you're convinced to get this, go to the retailer of your choice and purchase it from there, or, as always, use your library app or go face-to-face to borrow it. Otherwise, I have been Jim. You've been great. Happy reading.